أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Assalamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa ala awlad al-Hussein wa ala ashab al-Hussein. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The topic for tonight's lecture has to do with a question that some of us face from time to time. The question has to do with knowing what's the right approach, what's the right type of attachment that we are supposed to have with Imam Hussein alayhi salam and the tragedy of Karbala specifically, and the attachment that we have with Ahlul Bayt in general. One type of attachment that we can have with Imam Hussein and with Karbala, we can qualify it as an intellectual attachment. Another type, we can qualify it, we can call it an emotional or affective attachment. So first, let's see what do we mean by emotional and intellectual attachment. Then we'll compare between the arguments of both sides to see at the end which is the type of attachment that is supposed to be the one that we follow in our relationship with Ahlul Bayt and with Imam al-Hussein, and specifically with Karbala. So what is it that we mean when we say an intellectual attachment? There are people who say that the events of Karbala and the life of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam are things that need to be studied intellectually. We have to spend time writing articles, studying history, organizing academic conferences, organizing plays, drama, artistic canvases and poetry, and so on and so forth. All of these are considered intellectual activities through which we can attach ourselves to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and to Karbala. What do we mean when we say emotional attachment? A lot of it is what we witness right now. Every year when it is the season of mourning and sorrows of Muharram and Safar, we decorate our homes and ornament them with symbols of sadness and mourning. We wear black. We attend congregations of eulogy like this one, where we hear verses of poetry, where we hear historical facts that usually make us cry and weep when we imagine the scenarios that actually took place in the land of Karbala. And all of these stem from our emotional attachment. We cry, we beat our chests, we wear black. All of this comes from a very emotional place, from the heart. So is the right approach to take with regards to Ahlul Bayt and with regards to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, is it the intellectual approach or is it the emotional approach? So let's start by quickly looking at the arguments of both sides. Why do we study the life of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam? First of all, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is a pivotal figure in Islamic history, and he is a pivotal figure beyond Islamic history. He is not only limited to the school of Ahlul Bayt, nor is he even limited to Islam in general. The greatest thinkers and scholars in the world have always made it a point to study the life of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Social leaders, political leaders, religious leaders, great poets, great thinkers, people like Edward Gibbon and Charles Dickens and Mahatma Gandhi, all of them spent time studying the life of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Many of them writing articles and poetry and books about him. Gandhi saying, for instance, after studying the life and the tragedy of Karbala, I have learned from Hussein how to be victorious while being oppressed. This is but one example that shows us that Imam Hussein alayhi salam is a figure that is worthy of being studied historically, if for no other reason than just to study him historically, because if you look at human history, the events changed. There's a history before Karbala and there's a history after. History took a turn in the events of the tragedy of Karbala. We need to study them intellectually and understand what happened in order to understand the significance, the historic significance of Imam Hussein in history. The second reason is that we all claim and consider ourselves to be the followers of Ahlul Bayt and the followers of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. In order to follow someone, we must know enough about them. What is it that we know about Imam Hussein? What is it that we know about Ahlul Bayt? Unfortunately, many of us, myself included, we find ourselves saying that these are our role models. Imam Hussein is our role model. Ahlul Bayt are our role models. But if I know absolutely nothing about Imam Hussein, how can I say that he is my role model? In what do I follow him? Unfortunately, for a lot of us, we know a lot more about actors and singers and politicians and philosophers than we know about Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So in order to say that we are followers of Ahlul Bayt and specifically Imam Hussein, again for intellectual reasons, we study their lives to be able to say that we are true followers. One more reason is that the events of the tragedy of Karbala were truly significant. And no one could ever say that these happened out of thin air. There must have been developments, historic, political, cultural, that led eventually to the events of Karbala. Instead of just sitting and listening to the actual events that took place over a few hours or a few nights and days, let us try to understand what happened before. What were the circumstances that led to those events happening? Maybe there are lessons for us to learn from them and to apply in our own lives. And so this is another reason. And finally, the last reason that is intellectual, that opens the door to the second type of attachment, is that we say that we are lovers of Ahlul Bayt. That we are lovers of Imam Hussein. When you love something, when you love someone, you want to know everything you can about it. People who love the oceans, they go and find out what's going on in the oceans. People who love a sport, they go and find out everything they can about that sport. If you love a person, you try to find out everything you can about that person. And the more you find out, the more knowledge you have, the more love you will have. And the more love you will have, the more knowledge you want. This is a cycle. So from an intellectual perspective, these are the main reasons why we would want to study the life of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Now let's look at the other side. Why do we study the life of Imam Hussein alayhi salam from an emotional perspective? Why is it that we study it to attach ourselves through the heart? All of us here and all over the world celebrating, commemorating the events of Karbala, we consider ourselves religious people. A religious person starts their faith and their religion, they take it from somewhere. They do not make it up. So we start by looking at the manner in which the Holy Prophet and Ahlul Bayt, peace upon them all, actually dealt with Imam Hussein alayhi salam. This is our starting point for the emotional attachment. We find in history that right from the beginning, from the first day of the birth of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, in all the narrations we are told the Holy Prophet took him and kissed him and cried. He started to establish the tragic aspect of Imam Hussein's life the day the Imam was born. The Imam spent 6 years and 6 months with the Holy Prophet. During that short period of time, the Prophet repeated numerous narrations that have reached us, describing the tragic events and the tragedy that would be the end of the life of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his companions. So right from the beginning, we see that the behavior of the Holy Prophet himself contained a dimension of affection and emotion. It was an attachment of the heart. The Holy Prophet is crying himself for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And then when we look at the Imams of Ahl al-Bayt, one after the other, we see that they all commemorated and celebrated the events of Karbala. From Imam Ali alayhi salam and going down, this is before the actual tragedy. Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, Fatimah al-Zahra, and then after the tragedy, we have very strong and multiple narrations from Imam al-Sajjad, Zain al-Abidin, Imam al-Baqir, Imam al-Sadiq, Imam al-Kadhim, and Imam al-Rida. Specifically those Imams, we have many narrations explaining to us what they would do to commemorate the events of Karbala. We were told that they would wear black, that they would seem depressed, they would never be seen smiling or laughing during the 10 days, that they would pay handsomely for people like poets and reciters and lecturers to come to their homes to establish these types of congregations, to remind people and teach people about Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And the Imams were making it a point to ensure that they would be seen crying, they would be seen sad. This is all an emotional attachment with the Imam. And then the Imams also tell us that every single one of the major prophets of God also commemorated the events of Karbala in their own way and in their own time. We have strong narrations about Prophet Adam, Prophet Nuh, Prophet Ibrahim, Prophet Musa, all of them visiting the land of Karbala, all of them crying for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Not dealing with it intellectually, dealing with it emotionally. Beyond all of this, when we look at the Islamic calendar, the 355 days of the year, it is full of events. Events like the celebration of Eid al-Khum, where the Holy Prophet appointed Imam Ali as an Imam, or the events that take place in the month of fasting, Shahr Ramadan al-Mubarak, or the season of pilgrimage. These are but a few of the instances that take place, the many events that take place during the calendar. If you take a book of the worships and rituals that are recommended, you will find that the one thing that is common to all of the Islamic events is a salutation, a visitation, a ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein. In every single event, the Imams linked that event somehow to Imam al-Hussein. And the visitation, we all know it by heart, contains many parts that contain the emotional, tragic aspect of Karbala. And then we come to our own Imam, the Imam of our time, where we have his words reported to us in a very special, very eloquent ziyarah, very eloquent salutation called Ziyarat al-Nahiya al-Muqaddasa, that I recommend that all of us take a good look at, and in which we hear the Imam himself describing his state and the attachment he has with his grandfather, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and in which he says, if the centuries have removed me from being there in your time, and fate has decreed that I cannot be there to help you, and if I was unable to fight alongside you and to show enmity towards those who are your enemies, then I shall mourn you every morning and every evening, and I shall cry tears of blood for you. These are the words of Imam al-Mahdi ajjalallahu farajah as they are reported to us in Ziyarat al-Nahiya al-Muqaddasa. When you hear these words, do you feel that they are more of an intellectual attachment or more of an effective emotional attachment with the Imam? So these are some of the reasons why we insist on this aspect. And there's more. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, when we look at the tragedies of Karbala, we see that he ensured and insisted on the tragic aspect of the tragedy. The Imam insisted to have his family members with him. The Imam could have hidden the effective emotional aspect away from the people, but he made sure to make it a scene that would be reported throughout history. When the Imam stands in front of both camps and he hugs his son Ali al-Akbar right before he lets him go to battle, to the point where while they're both hugging, they pass and lose consciousness and fall to the ground. Is this not a scene that the Imam is creating intentionally to show the tragic aspect of what is taking place, or when he takes the blood of his son, his newborn 3 to 6 months old son, when he gets killed into his own hands and he wipes it on his face, is it not to show the tragic aspect of the events that are taking place? This is all to say that the tragedy, the tragic aspect, has been insisted upon by our Imams. Why? The reason is very simple. There's a secret. The secret is that the mission of Imam Hussein through Karbala is supposed to be a universal mission. It is not limited to the followers of Ahlul Bayt, nor is it even limited to Muslims. It is to humanity that the Imam is trying to talk. And to talk to humanity, you can't always use reason and logic. If I want to explain to you what happens in the history of the Imam, and I describe to you the historic events, you may disagree with me. You may argue with me about history. If I try to explain to you that the Imam has the role and the rank and the position of Imamah, a theological discussion might ensue between us. But if I tell you that the Imam's wives, children, daughters, sons, his family were with him, all of them were exterminated in the manner that they were, then the discussion takes a very humanitarian perspective. No one is going to argue with me or with you that this is a tragedy that took place in history. And this is the secret that Ahlul Bayt insists on. They insist on the tragic aspect because this is the way you can reach the heart of any human being. And it represents the mission of the Imam. The people who are with the Imam then are going to be the people with the Imam today. You have the children, from the newborns to the eldest men and women in the camp of the Imam. You have women, you have men. You have soldiers and you have people who simply encountered the Imam on the way. You have Christians and you have Muslims. You have blacks and you have whites. You have slaves and you have masters. All of them joined together in common for a common goal. All of them in love of Imam al-Hussein because of what he represents. And the way to explain this is through the tragedy and the emotional aspect. So at the end of all of this, do we say that our attachment to the Imam, should it be an emotional attachment or should it be an intellectual one? The reality is that all of the arguments that we presented are extremely valid. And all of them are as important as the others. We must ensure that our attachment to the Imam is as emotional as it is intellectual. We cannot say that our attachment to the Imam is only emotional and not know what the Imam stood for, or what actually he went through, or what he believed in. And if we leave it at the level of the intellect without emotion, then it is as though we're going against the philosophy that Ahlul Bayt have taught us. And we are missing an opportunity to universalize the message of the Imam to the rest of humanity. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us better understand the events of Karbala so that we may become better followers of the Imam in belief and in action. Assalamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa ala awlad al-Hussein wa ala ashab al-Hussein wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi al-tayyibin al-tahirin.